The Big 12 football schedule has been released as they promoted the last 24 hours. We are here today 1 until 4 instead of 3 until 6. Hope you enjoy the special edition of the Big 12 football schedule. Paul Catalina, Craig Smoak. We will hear from a couple of either coaches or ADs in the conference, their reactions, your reactions, and, of course, much, much more. Paul and Craig are already in the middle of looking at what has been released. Garrett Ross is here. Jack McKenzie is here. And you guys, what have you seen so far that of interest? I know we're going to piece together and look at everybody and get your reactions along the way.
Well, just right off the top, and thankfully Baylor, and I love that I'm repping the reading glasses here like an old man, but Baylor plays Texas very early. They got UCF, no Oklahoma on the schedule for Baylor. That one's wild. October 21st is a pretty cool day in Houston, Texas, as the Longhorns will play there at Houston, at their stadium, not at Reliant or NRG, whatever it is now. And I'm just now getting into some of the rest of this.
All right, let's look at Baylor. Let's start with them, and we'll also get your feedback. The chat room, the text line, 254-339-1122. Baylor has the Texas State game to open up with, but eventually when they get into, of course, Utah's a non-conference game, and they also added, who's the third team? I can't even see that logo.
It's a shark logo. I have no idea who that is.
Coastal Carolina?
Huh? Long Island.
Long Island, okay. Texas, they have Texas, UCF, Texas Tech, then an off week, Cincinnati, Iowa State, Houston, Kansas State, TCU, and they end their regular season against West Virginia. We'll get into home and away. We'll let you worry about that yourself. For example, one of the new coming teams. Let's look at UCF, and Gus Malzahn, I believe, is going to join us today at 2:30 Central. Their conference games start with Oklahoma, Brigham Young, off week, Iowa State, Baylor, Oklahoma State, I'm looking at the wrong one, I'm sorry. Kansas State's their first conference game, UCF. Then it's Baylor, KU, off week, and then they play Oklahoma, West Virginia, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, and Houston. Texas, their conference schedule, they open up with Baylor. Then they play Kansas, and then there's the game, the Red River rivalry with Oklahoma. Off week, and then Houston, as Paul mentioned, Brigham Young, Kansas State, TCU, Iowa State, and then also Texas Tech. Texas Tech has West Virginia, Houston, Baylor, K-State, Brigham Young, off week, TCU, Kansas, UCF, and they close out the season against the University of Texas. So those are just some of them. We're going to try to piece them together. You can see that, in fact, where Garrett has it up on the screen, thanks to Jack McKenzie. Those are 4 schools right there that we have among those who are a part of the 2023 college football schedule. And I got to tell you, thank God it's here. Mack Rhodes has been saying by the end of January, Big 12 meetings Thursday and Friday this week. And so now, guys, kind of pick and choose your thoughts. We'll look at the chat room here in just a second and your thoughts about everything.
Those are the 4 Texas schools all together. My first thoughts are Baylor has 5 of their first 6 at home. In addition to that, which is kind of wild. TCU 4 of their first 6 at home, but 5 of their first 6 at home before the bye. So, while the opponents, Texas, Utah, and Tech are all going to be tough that are coming in here, that's still pretty favorable schedule, at least where you're going to be before the bye week. TCU, they go to UCF and to Houston. So that's kind of interesting on the new schools.
Craig?
Yeah, I think we need to kind of probably pocket this because we can go all over the place. So I think with Baylor, first of all, let's start there. I think that, it's a nice looking schedule. It's a favorable schedule as far as, looking at that last month. I think that, you got a couple of tough ones there with K-State and TCU and a couple of wild cards with Houston and West Virginia. But yeah, that's going to be, an interesting, 6-game stretch after your bye. Seeing Cincinnati will be pretty cool, seeing them for the first time. I guess the big things that stand out is not playing Oklahoma is obviously an interesting deal there. Not playing Oklahoma State Also an interesting deal there as well. So, who all's not on their schedule? You got Houston.
Well, they have
No,
three of the
Houston,
four.
okay.
They have Houston, UCF, and also Brigham Young. Is that right?
Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas, and BYU, I believe, right? Is that it?
Yep. And so those are the games. They've played Brigham Young the last couple of years. Texas is playing BYU again later in the October. And, of course, they had some past games back when Taysom Hill was just wreaking havoc on a lot of different people, including the Longhorns.
Baylor also is UCF's first Big 12 home game. Obviously, the first Big 12 game for them, like you said before, Smokey,
the Bounce
was
House?
Kansas State. So, at the Bounce House, the very first Big 12 opponent who will be in there is Baylor on September 30th.
All right, so the text line is going. For example, Juan, Houston fan, who made a nice comment about us on Twitter late last night. Houston put out a little bit of a promo video. They had some of our audio involved. He said, it's so beautiful, haha. Also, from Rhino Reselling, 8 home games for Baylor. Let's tailgate. And also, some CT Ziggy. Are we thinking Texas Tech October 7th or Iowa State 10/28 for Baylor's homecoming game? I don't know about that. I hadn't even thought about that, but I understand why that will be a question for a lot of, especially the alums, among others. Paula, with no Oklahoma, that means Baylor beat them 2 years in a row before they go to the SEC. That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, because of 2021, the team that they had when they kind of tied Caleb Williams and company into a pretzel and then winning in Norman last year.
You know what's wild, to think about, and I know we've mentioned it on the show before, but the fact that this schedule, more than likely, the way that we're used to seeing college football schedules, and that will change as every other conference goes into 1 year, then the schedule's different, and then it's the reverse of the 2 years ago schedule that they'll have. But the fact that this schedule is more than likely a complete and total one-off, and there's not going to be, honestly, the return trips could be all wonky and split, and we can ask Mr. Pesman when we have him on later in the show if that's the case. Does this mean that – so Houston's coming to Baylor, but does that mean that the next time that they play, it will necessarily be in Houston, or because of the 2 extra teams that you're lopping off at the end of the year, then does that mean that you have to do this all again and then it restarts?
I would think, and that's a great question, but I thought, in fact, about, for example, Baylor played in Austin last year. If they were going to play Texas, which I can't imagine they wouldn't because of how long that's been going on, Craig, I thought there was no way they were going to have to go back to Austin. But sometimes the schedule does flip. The next year it does flip.
Yeah, it can. So, that was, something that obviously was in play there, and you just didn't know until you finally saw this thing drop. And it's a lot of information to sort through, and it's kind of hard to digest it all at once. I'm sitting here just focusing in on Baylor's schedule and still trying to sort through some things there. But, there's 13 other teams to also to look at. But, yeah, not playing Oklahoma is very interesting. I do think it's probably a game that you would prefer to have had, but if you're not going to have it, and maybe this is, in fact, their last year, then as Paul said, you beat them twice, home and away, on their way out. So, you've got that going for you, I guess, as far as bragging rights, goes here at the end. But I think you had to have Texas on here, especially if this is, in fact, maybe the end. I think one very interesting thing as well is, the number of home games that Baylor has, that's really going to play in their favor. That changes, I think, the perception of their season next year, the amount of home games that they have. If they don't take full advantage of that, there's really not going to be, a lot of room for excuse making there. That's very favorable. Not playing Oklahoma, I think you could also probably view that as favorable, quite frankly, because they're typically one of the better teams, even if they weren't last year. You'd probably, if you're what's the easiest schedule we could have, you probably don't have Oklahoma on that schedule if you could make it up, right?
I agree with you.
To miss them out there, I think it's interesting they're playing 3 new schools.
I like it.
Most
and 2
teams
of them
are
on the road.
Playing 2, I think, and I'm sure that varies because it has to vary just to make all of this work. But that is interesting that they are going to play 3 of the 4, and the one that they're not playing is the one that's kind of been set up as their potential de facto rival in BYU. But maybe that's because we've seen them play the last 2 years, that there's just not a necessity to see that right away once again, and you can kind of wait on that one since it's been fairly recent. But yeah, I mean, I think that's cool as well. And now we know their third non-conference opponent. I asked Mac Rhodes about that a week ago, and Long Island it is. So we had no idea who that was going to be, and he had made it sound like that was pretty much taken care of. So good to learn that. And yeah, that's another game you would chalk up as a win. So yeah, I mean, I think this is very favorable, but that week 2 game against Utah, I mean, we knew that was coming regardless of what was ever dropped today, and that will really be a tone setter for them. But, Texas and Utah there in that first month, they're going to be pretty tested and could very well walk out of that 2-2 if they're not careful. So, yeah, that'll be fun. A lot of home games, I'm all for that.
All right, so